Welcome to this visual explainer. We're jumping right into an incredible 8,000-year step-by-step journey today. We're going to look at the complete life cycle of ancient Egypt. I mean, think about it. How exactly did a barren desert settlement transform into this unstoppable empire ruled by actual living gods? And then, how did it unravel, step by step, until it totally collapsed? Let's get right into it. Here's our roadmap for the journey. We'll be looking at 1. The rise of the Nile. 2. Birth of the God Kings. 3. The Pyramid Age. 4. Steps to the afterlife. 5. Empires, wars, and rebels. And finally, 6. The fall of Egypt. So, Section 1. The rise of the Nile. Step 1 of this whole historical journey starts with the absolute lifeline of Egypt. Without this geographic catalyst, literally none of this civilization would even exist.
You know the saying, geography dictates destiny? Well, around 6000 BC, these tiny little settlements started forming in what was otherwise a brutal, unforgiving desert. But here's where the magic happened. Every single year, almost like clockwork, the Nile River would flood. And when those waters receded, they left behind this incredibly deep, rich, black soil. So while people in other parts of the world were constantly battling drought and starving, the early Egyptians were easily growing wheat, barley, and vegetables. This stable food surplus gave them the ultimate luxury: time. Time to sit back, think, plan, and actually build a society step by step.
Moving right into Section 2, Birth of the God Kings. Now, with full stomachs and these thriving settlements, society naturally began to evolve. But the glue that held them all together wasn't just some physical border, it was actually a massive psychological shift. Right around 3000 BC, you get King Narmer. This guy was a fierce warrior, famous for wearing this tall armor and supposedly holding his enemies by the hair. He managed to unify the separate regions of Upper and Lower Egypt. And he did it through this crazy mix of force, politics, and just sheer will. To the regular folks back then, unifying such a massive piece of land seemed completely impossible for a normal human being. They honestly believed it required the divine power of the sun god. And boom, just like that, the whole concept of the pharaoh is born. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is how religion and politics completely fused together. The pharaoh wasn't just some high priest speaking for the gods, he was literally an earthly god himself. But of course, absolute power comes with absolute accountability, right? If the Nile flooded perfectly and the crops were great, the pharaoh got all the praise. But if a drought hit or disease spread, the pharaoh was personally blamed for ticking off the heavens. People believed in this so intensely that everyday citizens would literally throw themselves face down on the ground in total submission whenever the pharaoh left his palace. Okay, Section 3, the Pyramid Age. Because they had this absolute, unquestioning devotion to a living god, the Egyptians were able to mobilize their society in a way the world had literally never seen, which leads us directly into the era of the megastructures. The Pyramid Age officially kicks off around 2600 BC. And just take a second to think about the sheer engineering happening at Giza step by step. We are talking about millions of stone blocks, each one weighing several tons, and they moved and placed them with microscopic precision. They aligned these massive structures almost perfectly to the north, south, east, and west, using nothing but sun shadows and star positions. No steel cranes, no computer models, just immense human muscle, brain power, and this unyielding dedication to building a tomb that would literally touch the sky. Now, this brings up a huge historical misconception. For decades, movies and pop culture have told us that these pyramids were built by armies of whipped slaves. But what's the reality? Archaeological evidence actually shows they were built by highly skilled workers. These guys lived in permanent camp cities right next to the construction site with their families. They were paid super well, feasting on premium rations like bread, beer, onions, and prime meat. For them, building the pyramid wasn't just some brutal job, it was a sacred duty. They were securing a safe afterlife for their god king, which in their minds kept the whole universe from falling apart. Let's look at Section 4, Steps to the Afterlife. Speaking of the afterlife, we're going to shift gears from these massive external buildings to the highly specific, deeply intimate procedures the Egyptians used to literally conquer death. You see, the Egyptians treated the afterlife as a literal physical journey that needed a physical vessel. So mummification was this somewhat macabre but highly exact step-by-step science. Step 1. Extract the brain through the nose. Yikes. Step 2. Carefully remove the major organs, liver, lungs, stomach, and place them in sacred jars.
But look at step 3. They always left the heart inside the body. Why? Because they believed the heart, not the brain, was the true seat of your identity and soul. Finally, step 4. Dry the body for weeks with salts, slather it in resins, and tightly wrap it in linen bandages. They even popped artificial eyes over the face so the mummy could quote-unquote see in the next world. Crazy, right? But here's the catch. Just having your body preserved didn't guarantee you a ticket to paradise. The Egyptians followed this highly detailed Book of the Dead, which basically outlined the ultimate afterlife test. Your heart would literally be weighed against the feather of truth. Pass the test by living a good life, and you get to step into the fields of reeds, this beautiful, peaceful paradise. But if you failed, you had to face Emmet. Emmet was this terrifying monster, part lion, part crocodile, part hippo. And she didn't torture you, she just devoured your heart. It was the ultimate punishment, immediate, permanent erasure from existence, gone forever. Fast forward thousands of years, and when modern archaeologists finally cracked open these tombs, they found some pretty intense warnings painted on the walls, threats of divine wrath if you disturb the resting pharaoh. So naturally, when a few expedition members died shortly after opening King Tutankhamun's tomb in the 20th century, the myth of the mummy's curse spread like wildfire. But honestly, the reality is way more scientific and way less magical. Those deaths were thoroughly investigated and traced back to things like long-dormant bacterial infections or just totally unrelated accidents. Still, you gotta admit, the myth surviving this long just shows how incredibly powerful ancient Egyptian psychology really was. Moving on to Section 5, Empires, Wars, and Rebels. Because, let's face it, no golden age lasts forever. Let's look at how this seemingly invincible civilization faced its first huge fractures, and how they had to adapt, step by step. The first real collapse hits around 2000 BC. We call this the First Intermediate Period. Remember how the pharaoh was supposed to control the Nile floods? Well, the floods failed. A massive drought set in, the crops totally withered, and suddenly, this earthly god started looking pretty weak. People completely lost faith. Central power shattered, and local governors just started building their own forts, basically acting like independent mini-kings. It was a really brutal century, full of famine and civil war. Eventually, the Middle Kingdom managed to restore some order, but then a brand new threat crept in from the outside. Around 1500 BC, this foreign group known as the Hyksos invaded. And they brought stuff the Egyptians had never even seen before: horse-drawn chariots, composite bows, advanced metal weapons. This wasn't just a crushing military defeat, it was a full-blown religious crisis. I mean, how could these foreign kings, who definitely weren't chosen by the gods, rule this sacred land? But the Egyptians were smart. They swallowed their pride, adopted all of the enemy's advanced tech, built their own chariots, and violently pushed the invaders right back out. And that triumphant step launched the glorious New Kingdom. Now, this New Kingdom era was a total roller coaster. You had the extreme highs of warrior kings like Thutmose III, who launched dozens of wars just to flood Egypt with foreign gold and territory. But then you had the bizarre lows, like the rebel pharaoh Akhenaten. This guy completely outlawed the traditional gods and forced everyone into a monotheistic religion centered purely on himself. People hated it so much that after he died, they literally chiseled his name out of the stone to erase his existence. Then you get the great Ramesses II, who fought these incredibly exhausting, massive battles. But eventually, even he realized endless war just wasn't financially sustainable, leading him to sign history's very first known written peace treaty. Which brings us to Section 6, the Fall of Egypt. Because that realization about unsustainability really sets the stage for our final chapter. This is the slow, agonizing, step-by-step unraveling of the ancient world's greatest civilization. You see, the collapse wasn't some sudden, dramatic explosion. It was more like a slow bleed that started around 1080 BC. Trade routes started breaking down, internal corruption spiked off the charts, and tax revenues tanked so badly that the pharaoh couldn't even afford to pay his own army. And once you can't pay your soldiers, trust completely vanishes. Egypt grew weak, basically turning into a giant chessboard for foreign empires. Nubians, Assyrians, Persians, they all took their turns invading and tearing off chunks of the empire, until finally, around 300 BC, Alexander the Great just marched right in and took control, shutting the door on native Egyptian rule forever. So during this final phase, the Ptolemaic era, the rulers were basically wearing an Egyptian mask. Sure, they used the title of pharaoh and they funded these big Egyptian temples, but behind closed palace doors, they spoke Greek and played ruthless Mediterranean power politics. It was this wild era of dual identity, which ultimately culminated in their final, most famous ruler,
Cleopatra VII. And let me tell you, she wasn't just the glamorous movie character we think of today. She was a fiercely intelligent, razor-sharp political strategist, doing everything in her power to keep her sinking kingdom afloat. Cleopatra was basically playing a high-stakes game of chess against the exploding superpower of Rome. She made these brilliant strategic alliances step by step, first with Julius Caesar and then with Mark Antony, desperately trying to stop Egypt from just becoming a Roman slave state. But her final move failed. Her combined fleet with Mark Antony got absolutely crushed at the naval battle of Actium by Octavian. Knowing the game was officially over and flat out refusing to be dragged through the streets of Rome in chains as a humiliated captive, Cleopatra made her final defiant choice. She took her own life. 30 BC. That number is absolutely crucial because it marks the exact definitive end of an 8,000-year epic story. In the year 30 BC, Egypt officially became a province of the Roman Empire. Think about that. The almighty god kings, the incredible minds that built the pyramids, the undisputed masters of the Nile, they were all reduced to mere memories. Their glorious divine empire literally just became another administrative posting for foreign bureaucrats. Which brings us to this quote, which perfectly distills the core lesson of the whole Egyptian civilization. When any system makes its rulers gods, stops asking questions, and places power above human limits, its fall is just a matter of time. The pharaohs genuinely thought they were immortal. I mean, they built literal mountains of stone and painted curses on walls just to prove it. But history showed us that when a system cuts itself off from accountability, stops asking the hard questions, and puts a single human being on a pedestal as a flawless god, its eventual collapse isn't just a possibility. It is an absolute certainty. So I'll leave you with this final thought. The pyramids still stand today, sure, but the kings who built them are nothing but dust. As you reflect on this incredible 8,000-year timeline, ask yourself, have we really outgrown this psychological trap? Or do modern societies today still fall into that dangerous habit of treating our political leaders, or even our cultural icons, like flawless, unquestionable gods? Thank you so much for exploring this history with me today, and I'll catch